Sarah Anderson had heard it all her life. Too fat to find love, too poor to fit in. In their small Texas town, where image was everything, she was the girl who served coffee at the local diner, ignored by eligible men and whispered about by cruel gossips. But Sarah had a secret, a strength that no one could see, a dream that wouldn't die. Then one rainy morning, a stranger walked into her diner. Wealthy, handsome, and kind, Jackson Cole saw something in her that others had missed. As their worlds collide, Sarah begins to wonder if fairy tales might come true after all. But in a town where appearances matter more than heart, could their love survive the judgment of others? But what happens when Sarah discovers the real reason behind Jackson's arrival in town? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun crept through the windows of Pete's diner, casting long shadows across the checkered floor tiles that Sarah Anderson had mopped just 20 minutes ago. She adjusted her coffee-stained apron, the same one she'd worn for the past 3 years, and began her daily ritual of preparing for the breakfast rush. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon grease filled the air as she moved through her routine with practiced efficiency. Her hands, slightly rough from years of work, but still gentle enough to perfectly flip the most delicate pancake, moved automatically as she filled sugar dispensers and checked the coffee makers. "Morning, Sarah," called Miss Rose, right on schedule. At 6:45 a.m., the elderly woman had been coming to Pete's every morning for as long as Sarah could remember, always choosing the same corner booth where she could watch both the sunrise and the town wake up. "The usual, Miss Rose?" Sarah smiled, already reaching for the worn menu she knew the older woman wouldn't need. "You know me too well, dear." Miss Rose's eyes crinkled with warmth. "And maybe you could spare a moment to sit with these old bones while the coffee's brewing?" It was their morning ritual, these quiet moments before the rush began. Sarah glanced at the clock. She had time. She slid into the booth across from Miss Rose, trying to ignore the way the vinyl seat seemed to protest. Under her weight, "You're looking particularly lovely this morning," Miss Rose commented, her sharp eyes taking in Sarah's freshly pressed uniform and the way she'd styled her honey-brown hair into a neat bun. Sarah fought the urge to fidget. "You're too kind." "Miss Rose, just trying to keep things professional, that's all." Miss Rose's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "And I suppose it has nothing to do with that handsome Bradley Morrison starting his new job at the bank across the street today." Heat crept up Sarah's neck. I hadn't even thought about that." The lie felt clumsy on her tongue. "Sarah Anderson, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. You can't fool me." Miss Rose reached across the table to pat Sarah's hand. "But honey, you don't need to change a thing about yourself for any man, especially not Bradley Morrison." Sarah withdrew her hand, busying herself with straightening the already perfectly aligned silverware. "It's not about changing myself. It's about presenting my best self." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Your best self is the one that made me those amazing apple cinnamon pancakes last week. The ones you created yourself, not from Pete's menu." Miss Rose's voice took on a gentle but firm tone. "The one who stays late to help old Mrs. Jenkins count her change. The one who remembers every regular's order and their children's names." Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Martha Wilson and her coffee club friends filed in, their designer handbags swinging and their voices carrying. Across the diner, Sarah stood quickly, smoothing her apron. "Duty calls," she murmured, grateful for the escape. As she approached the women's table, she could hear their stage-whispered conversations. "Did you see what she's done with her hair?" Martha's voice dripped with false concern. "Bless her heart, trying so hard." "I heard Bradley Morrison starting at the bank today," another woman added. "You don't think she's actually—" "Oh, honey, no. He's dating my niece Caroline. You know, the one who just graduated from UT, size 2, beautiful girl." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her order pad. Good morning, ladies. What can I get for you today? Oh, Sarah. Martha's smile was sharp as a razor. We'll all have the yogurt parfait, fat-free, of course. And you might want to try one yourself, dear. I hear Bradley Morrison likes his women fit. The other women tittered behind their menus. Sarah wrote down their orders mechanically, her face burning. She'd known these women all her life, had gone to school with their daughters, served them countless meals, endured their helpful suggestions and backhanded compliments. Back behind the counter, Sarah pulled out her mother's old recipe book from its hiding place beneath the register. The worn leather cover was soft under her fingers as she opened it to a random page, finding comfort in her mother's familiar handwriting. The book was filled with recipes, yes, but also with dreams. Dreams of their own restaurant, of sharing their love of food with others, of proving that passion and talent mattered more than appearances. "Don't let them get to you," came Lisa's voice as her best friend slipped onto a counter stool. Lisa worked at the boutique next door and always stopped in for coffee before her shift. "They're just jealous because their food tastes like cardboard. And yours tastes like heaven." Sarah managed a small smile as she poured Lisa's coffee. "Thanks, but sometimes I wonder if they're right. Maybe I should. If you say, go on a diet, I'm dumping this coffee on your head," Lisa threatened, her dark eyes fierce with loyalty. "You're beautiful, you're talented, and someday everyone's going to see that, including you." Sarah's fingers traced the edge of her mother's recipe book. Inside were the beginnings of her own recipes, dishes she created late at night after the diner closed, when she could experiment without judgment, dreams she kept as carefully hidden as the book itself. The morning rush began in earnest then, and Sarah lost herself in the rhythm of orders and coffee refills, letting the familiar routine wash away the sting of Martha's words. But every time the door chimed, her eyes would drift to the bank across, the street, where Bradley Morrison's new car gleamed in the Texas sun. She didn't notice Miss Rose watching her with concerned eyes, nor did she see the way the elderly woman's expression changed to one of determination as she pulled out her phone and began to type a message. 3 days later, the sky opened up over Cedar Grove, Texas. Rain hammered against Pete's Diner's windows, turning the usual morning crowd into a handful of determined regulars. Sarah watched water stream down the glass, creating abstract patterns that distorted the view of the bank across the street. Bradley Morrison hadn't even glanced her way once in the past 3 days. The bell above the door chimed, accompanied by a gust of wind that scattered napkins across the counter. Sarah turned, ready with her customer service smile, and froze. The man in the doorway was dripping wet, his boots caked with red Texas mud. He pulled off his cowboy hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples, and smiled. Not the practiced smile she was used to in Cedar Grove, but something genuine that reached his eyes. "Sorry about the mess," he said, looking down at the puddle forming around his boots. His voice was deep, with a slight roughness that suggested more time spent outdoors than in boardrooms, despite his obviously expensive clothes. "Don't worry about it," Sarah replied, already reaching for the mop. "Looks like you could use some coffee. Coffee would be heaven." He settled onto a stool at the counter, watching as she quickly dealt with the puddle. "I'm Jackson Cole." "Sarah Anderson." She poured him a cup of coffee, noting the way his hands, strong, work-weathered despite his well-tailored jacket, wrapped around the mug. "Best coffee I've smelled since leaving Montana," he said after taking a sip. "And trust me, I've had plenty of bad diner coffee between there and here." From her corner booth, Miss Rose looked up from her crossword puzzle, her interest clearly piqued. "Montana?" Sarah asked, finding herself genuinely curious. "That's quite a journey." "Business brings me all over," Jackson said, "but something about Cedar Grove caught my attention." His eyes met hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "The menu," she said quickly, reaching for a laminated page. "Can I get you something to eat? What would you recommend?" The question was simple enough, But something in his tone made Sarah pause. Most customers just ordered without asking her opinion, as if her size somehow disqualified her from knowing about food. "Well," she began hesitantly, "the breakfast special is popular." "No," Jackson interrupted gently. "What would you recommend? What's your favorite?" Sarah glanced around the nearly empty diner. In this weather it would stay quiet for a while. "Actually," she found herself saying, "I have something that's not on the menu. If you're willing to trust me?" Jackson's smile widened. "Lady, I just drove through a Texas thunderstorm. I'm feeling adventurous." In the kitchen, Sarah's hands moved with confident familiarity as she prepared her mother's special French toast. Thick slices of homemade bread soaked in a custard spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg, and her secret ingredient, a touch of browned butter. She topped it with caramelized peaches she'd put up herself last summer. When she placed the plate in front of Jackson, his eyes widened. "This isn't diner food," he said, picking up his fork. "This is art." Sarah held her breath as he took the first bite. His expression changed from appreciation to something close to wonder. "Sarah Anderson," he said slowly, "you've been holding out on Cedar Grove." Before she could respond, the bell chimed again. Martha Wilson hurried in, shaking rain from her. "Designer umbrella." She stopped short at the sight of Jackson, her eyes moving rapidly between him and Sarah. "Sarah, dear," she called out, her voice honey-sweet with venom, "I'll have my usual low-fat breakfast. Some of us have to watch our figures. You know." Sarah felt the familiar flush of shame creeping up her neck, but Jackson's voice cut through it. "Ma'am," he said, not taking his eyes off his plate, "you're missing out on the best breakfast in Texas, and I say that as someone who's eaten in every state west of the Mississippi." Martha's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. From her corner, Miss Rose didn't even try to hide her satisfied smile. The rain continued to pour outside, but somehow the diner felt warmer. Sarah busied herself with coffee refills, trying not to notice the way Jackson's eyes followed her movements. Or how, for the first time in years, someone in Cedar Grove was seeing her, really seeing her, instead of looking through her. The Cedar Grove Gazette lay spread across the diner's counter the next morning, its headline bold and unmistakable. "Montana Ranch Mogul Brings Business to Cedar Grove." Sarah stared at Jackson Cole's photograph, a professional headshot that captured his features but missed the warmth she'd seen in his eyes yesterday. "Well, well," Lisa said, sliding onto her usual stool and tapping the newspaper. "Looks like your mysterious cowboy isn't so mysterious after all. Cole Ranch Empire. Sarah, he owns half of Montana." Sarah wiped the already clean counter, avoiding her friend's eager gaze. "He's not my anything. He just had breakfast here." "Breakfast that made him come back for lunch and dinner," Miss Rose chimed in from her booth. "Don't think I didn't notice." The bell chimed, and Martha Wilson swept in with her usual entourage, their designer purses swinging in synchronized rhythm. They clustered around their regular table, heads bent over their own copies of the Gazette. $20 million, Martha stage whispered. "Can you imagine? And single, according to the article." She cast a calculating look toward the bank, where her niece Caroline worked as Bradley Morrison's assistant. Sarah focused on refilling coffee cups, trying to ignore the familiar ache in her chest. Of course, someone like Jackson Cole wouldn't. The bell chimed again. "Good morning, Sarah Anderson." Jackson's voice carried across the diner, warm and sure. He was wearing jeans and a crisp white button-down today, his boots still bearing traces of yesterday's mud. Martha's group fell silent, watching as he made his way to the counter. Sarah felt their eyes like physical pressure on her skin. "Good morning," she managed, already reaching for a coffee cup. "I see you made the front page." "Unfortunately." He settled onto a stool, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. "I was hoping to keep a lower profile, at least for a while." "That's not really possible in Cedar Grove," Lisa interjected, extending her hand. I'm Lisa Martinez, Sarah's best friend and official taste tester for all her secret recipes. Secret. Recipes? Jackson's eyebrows rose as he shook Lisa's hand. There's more than just that amazing French toast. Sarah has a whole book of... Lisa began, but Sarah cut her off with a sharp look. What can I get you for breakfast? She asked quickly. Surprise me, Jackson said. I trust your judgment. The words were simple, but they hit Sarah like a physical force. Trust. Judgment. When was the last time anyone in this town had offered her either? In the kitchen, she pulled out her mother's recipe book, then hesitated. Finally, she turned to her own section at the back, the recipes she'd created herself but never dared to serve. 20 minutes later, she placed a plate in front of Jackson. Sweet potato and pecan pancakes with bourbon maple butter, a recipe she'd perfected during lonely nights experimenting in the diner's kitchen. This isn't on the menu either, he said, studying the plate with obvious appreciation. It's something I've been working on, Sarah admitted quietly. Jackson took a bite and closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was something like wonder in his expression. Sarah, this is extraordinary. From their table, Martha and her friends watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. Sarah could practically see the gossip taking shape. Mr. Cole, Martha called out, her voice dripping honey. You simply must come to our church social this Sunday. My niece Caroline makes the most divine peach cobbler. Thank you, Mom, Jackson replied without taking his eyes off Sarah. But I already know where to find the best food in Cedar Grove. The flush that crept up Sarah's neck this time wasn't from shame. Later, after the breakfast rush had died down, Sarah found a business card tucked under Jackson's coffee cup. On the back, he'd written, Dinner? I know a great chef. His phone number was scrawled beneath. Girl, Lisa whispered, peering over Sarah's shoulder, do you know what this means? Sarah stared at the card, her heart hammering. It means he's being kind. No, Miss Rose said firmly, appearing beside them. It means he sees what the rest of this town has been too blind to notice. She patted Sarah's hand. The question is, dear, are you ready to let someone really see you? Sarah slipped the card into her pocket, feeling its weight like a promise, or maybe a challenge. Outside, the Texas sun blazed bright and unforgiving, but for the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel the need to hide from its light. The afternoon lull at Pete's Diner usually meant time for prep work and cleaning, but today Sarah found herself staring at the phone number burning a hole in her apron pocket. 3 days had passed since Jackson left his card, and she still hadn't called. You're overthinking it, Lisa had said that morning. Maybe she was right. The bell chimed, and Sarah's heart skipped, then settled when she saw it was just the mailman. But behind him came Jackson, carrying a worn leather journal that looked startlingly similar to her mother's recipe book. I thought I'd find you. Here, he said, sliding onto what she'd started thinking of as his stool. Where else would I be? The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. Jackson didn't flinch. Instead, he placed the journal on the counter between them. I brought something for you. My mother's recipe book. Sarah's hands stilled on the glass she'd been wiping. Your mother's... Her biscuit recipe won the Montana State Fair 3 years running, he said, opening the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon. But she always said it was missing something. Sarah leaned forward despite herself, studying the careful handwriting. Buttermilk biscuits? The secret, Jackson said, his voice softening with memory, is grating frozen butter. But Mama could never get them quite as fluffy as her grandmother's. Sarah studied the recipe, her professional interest piqued. Did she try... She stopped herself. Try what? Jackson prompted. Well, Sarah said slowly, sometimes if you fold the dough like a letter 3 times, with a 15-minute rest in between, it creates more layers. And if you brush them with honey butter right as they come out of the oven. Jackson's smile spread slowly across his face. Would you show me? Before she could second-guess herself, Sarah found herself leading Jackson into the diner's kitchen. She pulled out her mother's recipe book, setting it next to his mother's on the steel prep table. My mama had her own biscuit secrets, she said, opening to a well-worn page. They worked side by side, Sarah demonstrating the folding technique, while Jackson shared stories about his mother, teaching him to cook on their ranch. His hands were sure and confident with the dough, showing none of the awkwardness she'd expected from a wealthy businessman. Most people assume I was born into money, he said, as if reading her thoughts. But Mama and I started with just that little ranch and her recipes. Built everything from scratch, just like these biscuits. The kitchen, filled with the warm, comforting scent of baking bread. When Sarah pulled the golden brown biscuits from the oven and brushed them with honey butter, she caught Jackson watching her with an expression that made her cheeks warm. "See," she said quickly, breaking open a biscuit to reveal perfect, fluffy layers. "It's all in the folding." Jackson took a bite and closed his eyes. "Sarah Anderson," he said softly, "you just made my mama's recipe better than she ever did. Don't tell her I said that." "Tell her?" Sarah laughed. "I'm sure your mother doesn't want to hear about some diner cook improving her recipe." "Actually," Jackson said, pulling out his phone, "she'd love to thank you herself." He held out the phone, showing a FaceTime call connecting. "What? No, I can't." But before Sarah could protest, a warm face appeared on the screen, with Jackson's same kind eyes. "So this is the chef my son won't stop talking about," Jackson's mother said, her smile genuine. "Tell me, dear, what's your secret for keeping the butter from melting?" An hour later, Sarah had shared her folding technique, learned 3 generations of Cole family recipes, and somehow promised to try Jackson's mother's famous chocolate pie recipe for the diner's weekend special. "See," Jackson said after they'd said goodbye to his mother, "some people care about food, about the love that goes into it. Not just—" He gestured vaguely toward the dining room where Martha's group was undoubtedly spreading the latest gossip about their kitchen collaboration. Sarah looked down at their 2 recipe books side by side on the prep table, her mother's and his mother's, both worn with love and use, both containing dreams passed down through generations. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for sharing this with me." "Thank you," he replied, "for making my mother's biscuits taste like home again." The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows, catching the flour dust in the air and turning it to gold, and for a moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't in years: possibility. Sarah found the note tucked under the sugar dispenser during her morning setup. The paper was expensive, the kind Martha Wilson used for her church committee memos, but the message was unsigned. "Gold diggers come in all sizes. Does he know you're just after his money?" Her hands trembled as she crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, but the words stayed with her, echoing the doubts that had been growing since Jackson's daily visits became the talk of Cedar Grove. "Don't let them get to you," Lisa said later, watching Sarah aggressively wipe down tables. "They're just jealous because he hasn't spared their precious Caroline a second glance." "Maybe they're right," Sarah said quietly. "Look at him, and then look at me." "I am looking at you," Lisa snapped. "I'm looking at my best friend who's finally being appreciated for who she is, and I'm looking at her trying to talk herself out of happiness because some small-minded people can't stand to see it." Before Sarah could respond, the diner's door opened. Bradley Morrison walked in, his banker's suit perfectly pressed, Caroline Wilson trailing behind him with a stack of files. "Sarah," Bradley nodded curtly. "2 coffees. To go." As Sarah prepared their order, she could hear Caroline's stage whisper, "I just think someone should warn him, you know? I mean, it's obvious what she's after. A man like that, he needs someone who can represent him properly." Sarah's grip tightened on the coffee pot. Then another voice cut through the tension. "A man like what, exactly?" Jackson stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes hard as Texas flint. Caroline flushed. "Oh, Mr. Cole, I was just saying what an asset you'll be to our community. In fact, I'd love to show you some of our local investment opportunities." "I'm sure you would," Jackson interrupted, "but I make it a policy not to do business with people who mistake cruelty for cleverness." The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley grabbed their coffees and hurried Caroline out, but not before she shot Sarah a look of pure venom. "You didn't have to do that," Sarah said once they were gone. "Actually, I did." Jackson settled onto his usual stool. "My mama raised me to stand up to bullies. It'll only make things worse." "Then let it." He reached across the counter and took her hand, ignoring the small gasp from an elderly couple by the window. "Sarah, do you know what I see when I look at you?" She tried to pull her hand away. "Jackson, please." "I see someone who pours her heart into every dish she creates, who remembers every customer's preferences and treats them all with kindness, even when they don't deserve it, who has more talent in her little finger than most chefs I've met in five-star restaurants. And I see someone who's going to regret being associated with a fat diner cook once the novelty wears off," Sarah whispered. Jackson's grip on her hand tightened. "First of all, you're not just a diner cook, you're a chef who hasn't been given her chance to shine. And second," he paused, making sure she was looking at him, "I've spent my whole life watching people judge me by my bank account instead of my character. I know what it's like to have others reduce you to a single aspect of yourself. I'm not about to do that to someone else." From her corner booth, Miss Rose cleared her throat. They both turned to find her holding up a familiar piece of expensive paper. "Found this in the trash," she said, waving the crumpled note. "Thought you might want to know Martha Wilson ordered this stationery special from Dallas. Has her initials watermarked on the back." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but Jackson just laughed. "Well now, isn't that interesting? You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about hosting a dinner party to announce my business plans for Cedar Grove. Maybe we should cater it, with all your original recipes." "Are you crazy?" Sarah stared at him. "Martha Wilson and her friends would never eat my food if they knew I made it." "Exactly," Miss Rose chimed in, her eyes twinkling. "Imagine their faces when they find out they've been raving about your cooking all evening." For a moment Sarah saw it. The shocked expressions, the forced politeness, the undeniable proof of her talent. Something warm unfurled in her chest. Something that felt a lot like courage. "You know what?" she said slowly. "Maybe it's time Cedar Grove got a taste of what I can really do." Jackson's answering smile was bright enough to outshine all the gossip in Texas. The diner was quiet in the hours between lunch and dinner, sunlight slanting through the windows and turning the worn linoleum golden. Sarah sat at the counter, her mother's recipe book open beside a notebook filled with careful calculations and rough sketches. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the bell chime. "What's this?" Jackson's voice made her jump. She tried to close the notebook, but he'd already caught a glimpse of the detailed floor plans and menu ideas. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "Just daydreaming." Jackson settled onto his usual stool, his eyes serious. "Those looked like professional restaurant layouts to me, and very good ones." Sarah hesitated, then slowly reopened the notebook. "I've been working on it for years, whenever I have a spare moment." She turned a page, revealing carefully crafted budgets and inventory systems. "My mother, she always wanted her own restaurant. After she passed, I started planning how to make her dream come true." "May I?" Jackson asked gently. When she nodded, he began studying the pages with the same attention he'd given her cooking. "Sarah, this is incredible. You've thought of everything. Kitchen workflow, storage optimization, even seasonal menu rotations. It's just fantasy," she said, but her voice wavered. "Who'd back a restaurant run by someone like me?" "Someone like you?" Jackson's voice sharpened. "You mean someone with natural talent, business sense, and a clear vision? Someone who understands both the creative and practical sides of running a restaurant?" "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant," he interrupted. "And you're wrong." He turned to a page showing her proposed opening menu. "These dishes, they're a perfect blend of comfort food and innovation. Like these sweet potato biscuits with honey butter and crispy sage, or this peach cobbler with lavender cream. Traditional recipes with modern twists," Sarah explained, warming to the subject despite herself. "Things that feel familiar, but surprising." I wanted to create a place where food tells a story, where every dish has meaning. Like your mother's recipes, and my own creations. She pulled out another notebook, this one filled with recipe developments and tasting notes. I experiment after hours sometimes. Pete lets me use the kitchen as long as I buy my own ingredients. Jackson read through her notes, his expression growing more intense. Sarah, this isn't just good. This is extraordinary. The way you break down flavors, the attention to seasonal availability, the cost analysis for each dish. He looked up at her. You're not just a chef, you're a born restaurateur. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. It doesn't matter. I could never afford the startup costs, and no bank in Cedar Grove would give me a loan, especially not after, she gestured to herself, the meaning clear. Their loss, Jackson said firmly. He turned another page in her notebook. Tell me about this layout. Why did you choose this flow for the dining room? For the next hour, Sarah found herself explaining every detail of her dream restaurant. The horseshoe-shaped bar, where guests could watch the kitchen at work. The private dining room for special occasions. The herb garden she planned for the back patio. The whole design is about connection, she explained, growing more animated. I want people to connect with their food, with the people who make it, with each other. No more barriers between the kitchen and dining room. No more hiding the process. No more hiding at all, Jackson said softly. Sarah met his eyes, seeing understanding there. No more hiding. Just then, Pete emerged from his office, eyebrows rising at the sight of them, bent over the notebooks. Sarah, he called out. Orders up. But there was no order window bell, no ticket in the kitchen. Sarah recognized it for what it was, Pete's way of reminding her of her place. Jackson noticed too. His jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Sarah touched his arm. It's okay, she said. Sometimes dreams take time. They don't have to. Jackson gathered her notebooks carefully. Would you have dinner with me tonight? Not here. Somewhere we can really talk about this. Sarah thought about the note from Martha, about Caroline's whispers, about all the reasons she should say no. Then she thought about her mother's dream, waiting all these years in a notebook full of possibilities. Yes, she said, I'd like that. As she watched Jackson leave with her notebooks tucked safely under his arm, Miss Rose appeared beside her. Sometimes, the older woman said wisely, God sends us angels in cowboy boots. Sarah smiled, touching the worn cover of her mother's recipe book. And sometimes, she replied, he makes us wait until we're ready to believe in them. The Italian restaurant in the next town over was small but elegant, far enough from Cedar Grove to avoid prying eyes. Sarah sat across from Jackson, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the intimate lighting and expensive wine list. Relax, Jackson said softly, noticing her discomfort. This place reminds me of where I started. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather photo album. I think it's time you knew the real story of Coal Ranch Empire. The first photo showed a much younger Jackson and a woman who had to be his mother, standing in front of a rundown diner not unlike Pete's. Both wore shabby clothes, but their smiles were radiant. Mama's place, Jackson said, his finger tracing the faded sign. Our first restaurant. It was barely more than a shack, but Mama made every customer feel like family. Sarah leaned closer, taking in the details. How old were you? 19, just me and Mama after Dad passed. We had nothing but her recipes and a dream. He turned the page, revealing a newspaper clipping. Then the food critic from the Montana Standard stopped by. The headline read, Hidden Gem, Mother-Son Duo serves up Montana's best comfort food. That review changed everything, Jackson continued. Suddenly we had lines out the door, but more importantly, it gave us credibility with the bank. Another page turn showed the same building transformed, fresh paint, new windows, a proper sign. Our first renovation. We did most of the work ourselves. Sarah studied the progression of photos, watching as one successful restaurant became 2, then 5, then a whole hospitality group. But it was the early pictures that held her attention, the determined look in young Jackson's eyes, his mother's proud smile. "People see the success now," Jackson said quietly. "They don't see the nights Mama and I slept on flour sacks in the kitchen because we couldn't afford an apartment and the restaurant. They don't see the burns, the cuts, the thousand small humiliations of starting from nothing." A waitress approached with their wine, and Sarah noticed how Jackson thanked her by name, asking about her family. The warmth in their interaction was genuine, reminding her of how he treated everyone at the diner. "That's why you understand," she said softly after the waitress left. "What people like Martha Wilson and Caroline will never get." He nodded. "That success isn't about where you start. It's about heart, determination, and being willing to serve others before yourself." He turned to the last photo. His mother standing in a vast, modern kitchen, still wearing her apron, still radiating that same joy from the first picture. "She still cooks every day," Jackson said. "Says she doesn't trust anyone else to make her biscuits right." He paused, then added, "Though she might trust you after those modifications you suggested." Sarah smiled, then grew serious. "Why are you showing me all this?" "Because I saw your notebooks, Sarah. Your plans, your recipes, your dream, they remind me so much of Mama's old notebooks." He leaned forward. "And because I want you to understand that when I look at you, I see myself 20 years ago, someone with everything it takes to succeed, just waiting for a chance to prove it." "Jackson," Sarah's voice wavered, "people will talk. They already are. Let them." He reached across the table and took her hand. "My mama taught me that the only opinions that matter come from people who've walked in your shoes. The rest is just noise." A comfortable silence fell as their food arrived. Sarah took a bite of her pasta and couldn't help analyzing the flavors, thinking how she might improve them. Jackson watched her with amusement. "What would you change?" "The sauce needs more depth," she said automatically, then blushed. "Sorry." "Professional habit. Don't apologize. That instinct to make things better, to see the potential in a dish, that's exactly what I'm talking about." He pulled out her business notebook, which he'd brought along. "Now, about this restaurant design of yours, I have some thoughts." As they bent over the plans together, their heads close in the candlelight, Miss Rose's words from that morning echoed in Sarah's mind. "Sometimes love starts with someone believing in your dreams as much as you do." Looking at Jackson, not the wealthy rancher but the boy who'd once slept on flour sacks, Sarah felt something shift in her heart. For the first time, she wasn't seeing an impossible fairy tale. She was seeing a path forward, one paved with understanding, shared experiences, and the kind of love that grew from common ground. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered personally by Bradley Morrison. Sarah knew something was wrong the moment she saw Pete's face as he read it in his office. Through the order window, she watched their animated discussion, Pete's gestures becoming increasingly agitated. "Sarah," Pete called finally, "come in here." She wiped her hands on her apron and entered the office, where Bradley sat primly in Pete's worn guest chair, a stack of documents on his lap. "The diner's being sold," Pete said without preamble. "Bradley's bank is handling the transaction." The world tilted sideways. "What?" "Now, your position is secure through the end of the month," Bradley said, not meeting her eyes. "The new owners have been very clear about—" "New owners?" Sarah interrupted. "Who?" Pete and Bradley exchanged glances. "That information is confidential," Bradley said smoothly. "But I assure you, they're very experienced in the restaurant business." Sarah's hands began to shake. The diner wasn't just her job, it was her home, her security, the place where all her dreams had taken root. "Pete," she said quietly. "How long have you known?" Her boss had the grace to look ashamed. "The offer came in last week. It's a good one, Sarah. More than good. At my age—" "I understand," she said, though her heart was breaking. "Thank you for telling me." She left the office on unsteady legs. Miss Rose took one look at her face and opened her arms. Sarah fell into them, fighting back tears. "Oh, honey," Miss Rose soothed, "sometimes when God closes a door, He opens a window. Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes. What if I'm not ready to jump? The bell chimed. Jackson walked in, his smile fading as he took in the scene. What happened? Sarah told him everything, watching his expression shift from concern to something unreadable. When is the sale final? He asked. End of the month, Bradley called from the office doorway, straightening his tie. And I must remind everyone that the details are confidential until the official announcement. Jackson's jaw tightened. Of course they are. After Bradley left, Sarah moved through her shifts like a ghost. Her regular customers noticed her distraction, but she couldn't bring herself to tell them. By evening, rumors were already circulating. Martha Wilson's coffee club had seen Bradley's car outside the diner. I heard it's becoming a fancy wine bar, Lisa said during her afternoon coffee break. Caroline was practically gloating about it at the boutique. Sarah just nodded, her mind on the recipes she'd developed in this kitchen, the dreams she'd built within these walls. What would happen to her mother's recipe book? The secret dishes she'd perfected over years of late night experiments? As she was closing up, she found Jackson waiting outside. Come with me, he said softly. There's something you need to see. He drove them to the old Thompson place on the edge of town, a beautiful but neglected building that had once been Cedar Grove's finest restaurant. What are we doing here? Jackson pulled out a set of keys. Looking at your future. Inside, moonlight streamed through dusty windows, illuminating a space that, beneath the cobwebs and years of disuse, still held echoes of elegance. The bones are good, Jackson said, walking her through the rooms. High ceilings, original hardwood. Floors, that huge kitchen you wanted. He paused. It just needs someone with vision to bring it back to life. Sarah's heart began to race. Jackson, what are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes things fall apart, so better things can fall together. He turned to face her. The sale of Pete's diner, that was always part of a bigger plan, my plan. The world tilted again, but differently this time. Your plan? Sarah whispered. I came to Cedar Grove because I'd heard about a talented chef who was hiding her light under a bushel. I read every review of Pete's diner, saw how the same dishes became extraordinary after a new cook started 3 years ago. He took her hands. I didn't expect to find you, Sarah. The real you. That was the surprise that changed everything. Sarah pulled away, her mind spinning. You knew all along the diner was being sold. Sarah, were you ever going to tell me, or just wait until you could swoop in and play the hero? It wasn't like that, Jackson started, but Sarah was already walking away, her footsteps echoing, in the empty restaurant. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see any more dreams turn to dust. Sarah spent the next 3 days avoiding Jackson's calls. She took her breaks in the kitchen, had Lisa run interference when he came to the diner, and tried to ignore the way her heart clenched every time the bell chimed. Martha Wilson's group was having a field day with the gossip. I heard he bought the diner just to shut it down, she overheard them whispering. Probably realized what a mistake he was making with, well, you know. On the 4th day, Miss Rose broke the silence. That boy's been sitting in his truck across the street for 2 hours, she said, nodding toward the window. Looks about as miserable as you do. He lied to me, Sarah said, refilling Miss Rose's coffee cup with more force than necessary. Did he? Or did he just not tell you everything right away? Same thing, like you told him all your dreams right away? Miss Rose raised an eyebrow. Sometimes people protect the things that matter most until they're sure it's safe to share them. Before Sarah could respond, the door opened, but it wasn't Jackson. It was his mother, Eleanor Cole, looking exactly like her photos, but somehow warmer in person. Well, Eleanor said, making her way to the counter, so this is where my son's been getting his heart broken. Sarah fumbled with the coffee pot. Mrs. Cole, Eleanor, please. She settled onto a stool, Jackson's stool, and fixed Sarah with a keen gaze. We need to talk, honey, about dreams and fears, and my foolish son who's gone about this. All wrong. She pulled out a thick folder and laid it on the counter. Do you know what this is? Sarah shook her head. This is every review of Pete's Diner from the last 3 years. Jackson had them tracked down. Local papers, food blogs, even Twitter comments. He spent months building a file on the mysterious chef who was turning a small-town diner into a culinary destination. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the folder. There were dozens of reviews, many with her dishes highlighted. The innovative twist on classic comfort food, a hidden gem in the heart of Texas. Whoever's in the kitchen is creating magic. He wasn't just buying a diner, Eleanor continued softly. He was looking for a partner, someone with the talent and vision to help him expand Cole Restaurant Group in a new direction. Authentic, community-focused establishments that honor local flavors and traditions. But why didn't he just tell me? Because of what happened. In Montana, Eleanor sighed. 3 years ago, we tried something similar. The chef there was talented, but once the contracts were signed, she shook her head. She changed, started demanding creative control, refusing to work with local suppliers, treating staff poorly. We had to buy her out at a huge loss. Sarah remembered Jackson's words about people changing when money was involved. So this time, Eleanor continued, he wanted to know the person behind the talent. See how they treated people when they thought no one was watching. See their real dreams, not just their ambitions. She pulled another document from her bag, a business proposal. This was his original plan. But somewhere between your French toast and your mother's recipe book, the plan changed. He fell in love, not just with your cooking, but with you. Sarah's vision blurred as she read the proposal. It outlined everything she'd dreamed of. Her own restaurant, creative control, a partnership structure that would let her earn ownership, shares over time. He was going to tell you everything that night, Eleanor said, had this whole speech planned, but when he saw how upset you were about the diner, he panicked, Sarah whispered. He's not perfect, honey. Growing up poor leaves scars, makes you careful about revealing your hand too soon. Eleanor's eyes were gentle. Something tells me you understand that. Sarah thought about her own hidden dreams, her careful plans, her fear of being judged. The question is, Eleanor said, standing up, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Yes, you do. Eleanor squeezed her hand. You know exactly what it's like to have a dream so big it scares you. To want something so much you're afraid to reach for it. She headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Sarah, those biscuits you made with him, best I've ever tasted. In our family, that counts for a lot. After Eleanor left, Sarah stood at the counter, looking at the scattered papers that represented everything she'd ever wanted. Her mother's voice seemed to whisper in her memory. Sometimes love is like a good recipe. All the right ingredients have to come together at just the right time. Through the window she could see Jackson still sitting in his truck, looking as lost as she felt. Behind her, Miss Rose cleared her throat. Well, the older woman prompted. Sarah touched the business proposal, then her mother's recipe book. Then finally, the small note Jackson had left with her months ago, the one that had started everything. I think, she said slowly, it's time to stop hiding. That evening, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by the pieces of her past and possible future. Her mother's recipe book lay open beside Jackson's business proposal, while Miss Rose's letter, delivered by Lisa just hours ago, waited, unopened. The apartment felt different somehow, as if the walls that had once felt protective now seemed confining. She ran her fingers over her mother's handwriting, remembering all the times they dreamed about their own restaurant while experimenting with recipes in this very kitchen. Finally, she opened Miss Rose's letter. My dearest Sarah, it began, in Miss Rose's elegant script. I've watched you grow from a shy girl who loved to bake into a woman, afraid to claim her own worth. Now let me tell you a story about another young woman who once let fear steal her chance at happiness. Sarah settled back, reading about the Miss Rose she'd never known, a talented singer who'd turned down a chance to perform in Nashville because she was afraid of what people would say, afraid of failing, afraid of wanting too much. "I've spent 50 years wondering what if," Miss Rose wrote, "wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to reach for my dreams, to believe I deserved them." "Don't let fear write your story, dear heart." Sarah put down the letter, her eyes drawn to the business proposal. She'd read it a dozen times now, understanding more with each reading. Jackson hadn't just offered her a job, he'd crafted a partnership that protected her creative freedom while providing the support and resources she'd need to succeed. She moved to her window, looking out at the Texas night. The diner's sign glowed in the distance, and for the first time she saw it clearly, not as a shelter, but as a stepping stone. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Martha's crew is planning some big welcome dinner for the new owners next week, probably hoping Caroline can catch Jackson's eye. You really going to let them win?" Sarah smiled despite herself. In the past, those words would have sent her retreating further into her shell. Now they sparked something different, determination. She pulled out her own notebook, the one full of recipe innovations and business plans, and began to write. If she was going to make a decision, she needed to understand exactly what she would be risking and what she might gain. On one page, she listed her fears: failure, judgment, loss of control, having her heart broken. On another, she wrote her dreams: creating food that told stories, building a place where everyone felt welcome, honoring her mother's legacy, finding someone who saw her, truly saw her. As she wrote, a memory surfaced, her mother in their old kitchen teaching her to make pie crust. "The secret," she'd said, "is not being afraid of the mess. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to create something beautiful." The night had deepened, but Sarah kept writing, kept thinking. She wrote about Jackson, not the wealthy rancher, but the boy who'd slept on flour sacks, who understood the value of dreams and the price of achieving them. She wrote about herself, not the fat diner cook that Martha saw, but the chef who'd been quietly perfecting her craft, the businesswoman who'd been planning and preparing for years. Near dawn, she found herself back at her window. The diner's sign had gone dark, but the first hints of sunrise were painting the sky. Her mother used to say that dawn was God's way of reminding us that every day brings a fresh start. Sarah looked down at her notebook, now filled with what felt like the first honest words she'd written in years. At the bottom of the last page, she'd written a single question: "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" The answer came to her like the brightening sky, slowly at first, then with growing clarity. She thought about Jackson waiting in his truck, about Eleanor's words, about Miss Rose's letter. She thought about all the reasons to say no and the one overwhelming reason to say yes. She picked up her phone, then put it down again. This wasn't a conversation for texts or calls. Some things needed to be said in person, needed to be backed up with actions rather than just words. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror, really looked perhaps for the first time in years. "Time to get your hands dirty," she told her reflection. And finally, she smiled. Sarah arrived at the diner early the next morning, before even Pete's ancient coffee maker had sputtered to life. She wasn't surprised to find a manila envelope waiting, her name written in Jackson's steady hand. Inside were dozens of food reviews she hadn't seen in Eleanor's folder. But these were different. Personal testimonials, printed from the diner's online reviews, Facebook posts, and local forums. They weren't just about the food. They were about her. "The cook remembered my son's peanut allergy and created a special birthday dessert just for him. When my mother was in hospice, Sarah packed up dinner for our whole family, refusing to let us pay. After my husband passed, she'd save me a piece of his favorite pie every Thursday, just like when he was alive." Sarah's vision blurred as she read comment after comment. She'd never thought anyone noticed these small gestures. They were just things you did for people you served every day. A soft knock made her look up. Lisa stood in the doorway, holding 2 coffee cups from the fancy shop across town. "Thought you might need this," she said, settling into a booth. "Jackson dropped these off at the boutique last night. Asked me to make sure you saw them." She pulled out more papers. Photographs this time. They showed a series of small, thriving restaurants across Montana and Wyoming. Each had a distinct character, but they shared a warm, welcoming atmosphere. "These are his mother's original restaurants," Lisa explained. "The ones they started before the empire grew. He's kept them exactly as they were. Local staff, family recipes, regular customers who've been coming for decades." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you need to understand what he's really offering." Lisa leaned forward. "This isn't about turning you into some fancy celebrity chef or changing who you are. He wants to give you the chance his mother gave him, to take what's already special and share it with more people." Sarah picked up another review. "Best comfort food in 3 states, served with a side of genuine kindness." "He had all these gathered before he even came to Cedar Grove," Lisa continued. "Said he knew from the reviews that the chef here had something special, not just cooking skills, but heart." A new voice joined them. "He said the same thing to me." Miss Rose settled into the booth, looking pleased with herself. "Called me up 2 months ago asking about the chef at Pete's. Wanted to know if the person behind the food was as genuine as the dishes suggested." Sarah stared at her. "You knew? All this time? Honey, who do you think told him about your mother's dream of opening a restaurant? About how you've been working toward that dream every day since she passed?" Miss Rose's eyes twinkled. "Though I didn't expect him to fall head over heels for you. That was just God's perfect timing." Sarah looked back at the photos of the small, successful restaurants. She could see touches that reminded her of her own dreams: open kitchens, comfortable spaces where people could gather, menus that told stories through food. "There's more," Lisa said softly, pulling out one final document. It was a draft menu. Her menu, the one she'd sketched out in her notebook but professionally designed. Next to each dish was a note in Jackson's handwriting: "Your mother's biscuit recipe, the foundation, sweet potato pancakes. Your innovation, apple pie with rosemary crust. Your signature." He'd understood. Not just the food, but the meaning behind each dish, the way she wove tradition and innovation together, the way she used food to honor the past while creating something new. At the bottom of the menu was a simple note: "This isn't my vision for you. It's your vision, which I'd be honored to help make real. J." Sarah ran her fingers over the menu, remembering all the nights she'd spent dreaming about seeing her dishes presented like this. She thought about Jackson's mother, starting with nothing but recipes and determination. About Miss Rose's letter and its warning about letting fear write your story. "The thing about dreams," Miss Rose said gently, "is that sometimes they come true in ways we don't expect. Sometimes they come with challenges that test whether we're ready for them." Sarah looked at the growing pile of evidence of Jackson's genuine intentions, his careful research, his respect for what she'd built. She thought about her own secret preparations, her hidden dreams, her fear of being vulnerable. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time I had a conversation with Jackson." Cole. Sarah found Jackson where she knew he would be, at the old Thompson place, measuring the kitchen space with a contractor. When she walked in, he froze mid-sentence, hope and uncertainty warring on his face. "Could we talk?" she asked quietly. "Really talk this time?" The contractor took one look between them and made himself scarce. Jackson set down his measuring tape, giving Sarah his full attention. "I brought something," she said, pulling out both their mother's recipe books and setting them on the dusty counter. Next to them, she placed the partnership agreement he'd drafted. "I think it's time we put all our cards on the table." "Sarah, Let me go first," she interrupted gently, "because I understand now why you did things the way you did. And I need you to understand why it scared me so much." She opened her mother's recipe book to a page stained with years of use. "My whole life, I've heard people tell me what I couldn't do, what I didn't deserve. Too fat to be a real chef, too poor to own a restaurant, too everything. Her voice caught, but she pressed on. So I learned to hide, to keep my dreams small and safe where no one could laugh at them. Jackson took a step toward her, but she held up her hand. Please, I need to finish. She turned to his mother's recipe book next. When you showed me your story, your beginning, I saw myself, but it also terrified me, because suddenly everything I'd been dreaming of seemed possible. And possible is so much scarier than impossible, because possible can fail, Jackson said softly. Exactly. She met his eyes. And then I found out about your research, about how long you'd been planning this, and it felt like I'd been manipulating you, like it was too good to be true, she corrected. Like I was seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was real. Jackson moved closer, his fingers brushing the partnership agreement. This is real, Sarah. Every word of it, the business plan, the creative control, the path to ownership, it's all exactly what you wrote in your notebooks, because your vision for this place, it's better than anything I could have come up with. But why me? You could have any chef in Texas. Because they don't have your heart. His voice was firm. They don't stay late making special desserts for kids with allergies. They don't remember what pie someone's husband loved. They don't see food the way you do, as a way to make people feel loved and welcomed and remembered. Sarah touched the menu he'd annotated. Like your mother's restaurants. Exactly like them. When I read those reviews about Pete's Diner, I recognized what I grew up with, a place where food was about more than just eating. Then I met you and... He smiled ruefully. Well, that wasn't in the business plan. No, Sarah said quietly. It wasn't. She took a deep breath, looking around the empty restaurant. Now that she was really seeing it, really letting herself imagine, she could picture everything. The warm lighting, the open kitchen where she could greet her guests, the herb garden they'd talked about. If we do this, she said slowly, we need to be honest with each other, completely honest. No more protecting each other from the truth, no matter how much we think we're helping. Deal. Jackson held out his hand, then laughed. Sorry, force of habit. This isn't a business transaction. No, Sarah agreed, stepping closer. It's not. So what is it? She looked up at him, seeing not the wealthy rancher or the business partner, but the man who'd believed in her dreams before he'd even met her, who'd seen her value when she'd forgotten it herself. It's a beginning, she said, a real one this time, with all our cards on the table. Jackson's smile was like sunrise breaking. I can work with that. He pulled her close, and this time when they kissed, there were no secrets between them, no hidden fears or unspoken doubts. Just the promise of something true beginning to bloom. When they finally parted, Sarah laughed. You realize Martha Wilson is going to have a conniption when she finds out this isn't just a business arrangement? Let her. Jackson's eyes were warm. Some people can't recognize real love in food or in life. Their loss. Sarah looked around at what would become their restaurant. Hers and Jackson's, a dream they would build together. Speaking of food, I have some ideas for the opening menu. Of course you do, Jackson grinned. I've seen your notebooks, remember all those late-night experiments? Well, I have a few new ones you haven't seen yet. Been working on a special biscuit recipe, combination of your mama's technique and my additions. Now that, Jackson said, pulling her close again, sounds like the perfect way to begin. News travels fast in small towns, and Cedar Grove was no exception. By the time Sarah arrived at Pete's the next morning, Martha Wilson's coffee club was already in full swing, their whispers sharp as Texas thorns. A partnership with her, Martha's voice carried deliberately across the diner. I suppose he needs someone to handle the practical aspects while he manages the business end. Sarah kept her head high as she moved through her routine, remembering Jackson's words about people who couldn't recognize real love. But it was harder to ignore Caroline's calculated remarks at the counter. You know, she said, stirring her non-fat latte, my uncle in Houston knows several excellent chefs who'd be much more qualified for such an ambitious project. Before, Sarah could respond. Miss Rose's voice rang out clear and strong. You mean like that fancy chef from Dallas who couldn't even make a decent chicken fried steak? The one your mother hired for the country club last year? The diner fell silent. Everyone remembered that culinary disaster. Some people, Miss Rose continued, buttering her biscuit with deliberate precision, mistake fancy for good, just like they mistake expensive clothes for class. Martha's group shifted uncomfortably, but the real surprise came when Bradley Morrison spoke up from his usual table. Actually, he said, adjusting his tie, I've reviewed the business proposal. It's remarkably sound. Sarah's profit projections and market analysis. He cleared his throat. Well, let's just say I was impressed. Sarah hid her smile as she refilled his coffee. Trust Jackson to make sure even the town's banker had to acknowledge her business acumen. The bell chimed and Lisa burst in, waving a stack of papers. You are not going to believe this. The Houston Chronicle wants to do a feature on the restaurant. Something about rising stars in Texas cuisine and preserving authentic local flavors. Martha's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. The Houston Chronicle. Caroline's voice rose an octave. But that's the biggest paper in Texas. Lisa's grin was triumphant. Yeah, it is. Apparently someone sent them those reviews of Sarah's cooking, plus all those social media posts about her special dishes for folks with dietary restrictions. Sarah had a pretty good idea who that someone was, and she made a mental note to thank Eleanor Cole for her perfectly timed intervention. The diner's door opened again, and Jackson walked in with his mother. Eleanor made a beeline for Martha's table. Martha Wilson, I've been dying to ask you about your church's cookbook committee. Sarah and I were just discussing featuring some local recipes in the new restaurant's seasonal menu. You know, really highlighting the community's culinary heritage. It was a masterful move. Martha, caught between her desire to maintain her social standing and her instinct to snub Sarah, could only stammer her delight at being consulted. Jackson made his way to Sarah, kissing her cheek openly in front of everyone, ready to look at those contractor bids. Actually, Sarah said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear, I was thinking we should review my ideas for the kitchen layout first. I've got some thoughts about optimizing the workflow. She pulled out her notebook, no longer hiding it under the counter, and opened it confidently. Jackson beamed at her with unmistakable pride. From their various corners of the diner, Sarah could see the town's opinion reshaping itself. Pete nodded approvingly from his office doorway. The regular customers who'd benefited from her kindness over the years were smiling. Even some of Martha's coffee club members looked thoughtful, as if seeing Sarah clearly for the first time. Well, Bradley Morrison said, standing and straightening his suit, I think Cedar Grove is lucky to be getting such an innovative new establishment. He paused. My wife's been asking when we might be able to book the private dining room for her garden club meetings. Of course, Sarah smiled, though she might want to coordinate with Miss Rose. I hear she's already reserved it for the first Sunday of every month. Miss Rose winked at her over her coffee cup. Can't let these young folks forget where all the best recipes came from, can we? As the morning continued, Sarah felt the shift in the air. For every whispered doubt, there was a regular customer speaking up about their favorite dish she'd made. For every sidelong look from Caroline, there was a warm smile from someone who'd benefited from Sarah's quiet kindness over the years. By lunchtime, Martha Wilson was overheard telling her friends, well, of course, I always said Sarah had potential. Anyone could see that. Jackson squeezed Sarah's hand under the counter. You okay? He whispered. Sarah looked around at her changing world, at the people who'd doubted her, the ones who'd believed in her, and the man who'd helped her believe in herself. You know what? She said. I really am. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, holding the newly printed business cards. Sarah's kitchen at Cole Ranch was embossed in elegant script, with her name and title, Executive Chef and Partner. Her fingers traced the raised letters, remembering all the times she'd dreamed of having her own cards, but been too afraid to even design them. You're going to wear them out before you hand them out, Lisa teased from the doorway. She was carrying a garment bag and wearing her no-nonsense expression. Now, are you ready to tackle the next challenge? Sarah eyed the bag warily. I thought we agreed no new clothes until the restaurant opens? Honey, you have 3 interviews next week, including the Houston Chronicle, plus the contractor meeting today. Lisa unzipped the bag, revealing a sleek chef's coat in crisp white. You're not just a diner cook anymore. You're an executive chef and business owner. The coat was beautiful, professional grade with subtle tailoring that would fit her curves instead of fighting them. On the breast pocket, her name was elegantly embroidered, along with the restaurant's logo. Jackson, she guessed. Eleanor, actually. She said every chef needs armor they feel confident in. Sarah touched the fabric, thinking of all the ill-fitting uniforms she'd worn over the years, always trying to hide. This coat wasn't about hiding, it was about standing out, about claiming her place. Try it on, Lisa urged. The coat fit perfectly. Sarah looked in the mirror and for the first time saw what Jackson must see, not just a cook, but a chef, a professional, someone who knew her worth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Ready for the site meeting? Brought your mother's recipe book like you asked. Sarah smiled, typing back, on my way. Wait till you see what I've added to it. Over the past weeks, she'd finally started filling the blank pages in her mother's book, adding her own recipes with confidence instead of hesitation. Each new entry felt like a conversation with her mother, a continuation of their shared dream. At the construction site, she found Jackson reviewing plans with the contractor. He did a double take when he saw her in the new chef's coat. You look, he started. Professional, she supplied. Radiant, he corrected, making her blush. The contractor spread out the kitchen plans, and Sarah felt a familiar surge of excitement. This was her domain, and she knew exactly what she wanted. The prep stations need to be here, she said firmly, pointing to the layout. It creates better flow between the line and the walk-in, and the herb garden window should be larger. I want guests to see fresh ingredients being picked. The contractor nodded, making notes. There was no hesitation in his manner, no questioning of her expertise. She was the expert here, and everyone knew it. Oh, and one more thing, she added, pulling out her mother's recipe book. I've been working on the opening menu. She opened to the new section she'd added, pages of carefully tested recipes that blended her mother's traditional techniques with her own innovations. Dishes that told the story of who she was, where she came from, and where she was going. Sarah, Jackson breathed, looking at the recipes. These are incredible. They're me, she said simply. No more hiding, remember? Later, as they walked through what would become the dining room, Sarah stopped by the front window. The sign company was installing the temporary banner, coming. Soon, Sarah's kitchen at Cole Ranch. Second thoughts? Jackson asked softly. Sarah watched a group of women pause to read the sign. It was Martha's Coffee Club, but instead of their usual dismissive glances, they were pointing at the banner with obvious interest. Through the window, she could see their lips forming her name. No, she said, straightening her chef's coat. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. She pulled out one of her new business cards and walked outside to where Martha's group stood. Ladies, she said, her voice clear and confident, I'd love to tell you about our opening menu. We're planning something special for the Garden Club's first dinner. As she began describing her vision for the restaurant, Sarah felt the last traces of her old insecurity falling away. She wasn't just the fat girl from the diner anymore. She was a chef, a businesswoman, and finally completely herself. The old Thompson place was shedding its skin. Each day brought new changes, fresh paint brightening aged walls, gleaming equipment being installed in the kitchen, herb gardens taking shape in the courtyard. Sarah spent every spare moment there, overseeing details that would turn her dreams into reality. The windows need to be bigger, she insisted one morning, standing in what would become her kitchen. I want people to see the cooking, to feel connected to it. Jackson, who'd been reviewing tile samples, looked up with a smile. You know that means they'll see you too, right? No more hiding in the kitchen. That's the point. Sarah ran her hand along the smooth stainless steel of her new prep station. I spent too many years being invisible. The construction crew was used to her presence now, often seeking her input on details others might have overlooked. The height of the prep stations, the placement of burners, the flow between spaces. They'd stopped looking surprised when she demonstrated extensive knowledge of kitchen ergonomics and equipment specifications. "Chef," one of the workers called out, "where do you want the herb garden irrigation lines?" "Chef." The word still gave her a little thrill every time she heard it. As she explained her vision for the garden, Jackson watched her with unmistakable pride. These moments, her in her element, confidently directing others, were becoming more frequent. The Sarah who'd hidden her talents was disappearing like morning mist in the Texas sun. "Ms. Anderson," a delivery man appeared with a large package. "Sign here, please." Inside the box was their first set of plates, elegant but sturdy, with the restaurant's logo subtly embedded in the design. Sarah lifted one carefully. "Perfect," she breathed. "These will make your mother's biscuits look like they belong in a fine dining restaurant." "They already do," Jackson said. "But I know what you mean. It's all coming together." He was right. The dining room was taking shape exactly as she'd envisioned. Warm woods, comfortable seating arranged to encourage conversation, and most importantly, clear sight lines to the open kitchen. The private dining room, already booked solid for its first month by Martha Wilson's various social clubs, balanced intimacy with elegance. "I added something," Jackson said, leading her to a wall near the entrance. There, in a simple frame, hung a photograph of her mother outside the diner where she'd worked. Her dream of owning her own restaurant still just a spark in her eyes. Sarah's throat tightened. "Where did you—" Miss Rose had it, said she'd been saving it for the right moment. Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor burst in, waving a magazine. "Look what just arrived! The Houston Chronicle feature is out." The article was everything they'd hoped for. 4 glossy pages, celebrating the unique partnership between a Montana restaurant mogul and a small-town chef whose innovative approach to comfort food was redefining Texas cuisine. There was a photo of Sarah in her new chef's coat, looking confident and professional, and another of her and Jackson in the partially completed kitchen, heads bent over her mother's recipe book. "A love story told through food," Eleanor read. And from the article, where traditional recipes meet modern innovation and where two people from different worlds found common ground in their passion for authentic cuisine. Sarah touched the photo of herself. For the first time, she didn't see her size, didn't look for flaws. She saw what others saw, a chef in her element, a businesswoman ready to lead, a person comfortable in her own skin. The bell above the door chimed as Lisa rushed in. "You're not going to believe who just called the reservation line. The food critic from—" She stopped short, taking in the magazine and their expressions. "The article's out?" "It's perfect," Sarah said. "But what were you saying about the reservation line?" "Oh, right. The food critic from Texas Monthly wants to book a table for opening night. Says he's heard interesting things about our innovative— Don't take on Texas traditions." Jackson squeezed Sarah's hand. "Sounds like someone's been talking us up." "Actually," Eleanor admitted with a smile, "that might have been me. Had lunch with him last week in Houston. Might have mentioned Sarah's special touch with traditional recipes." Sarah looked around. At her almost completed restaurant, at the people who believed in her, at the future stretching bright before her. "Well then," she said, pulling out her notebook, "we better make sure the opening menu lives up to the hype." She began sketching out ideas, her confidence growing with each dish. This was her element now. Not just cooking, but creating experiences. Telling stories through food, leading a team toward a shared vision. Jackson pulled up a chair beside her, adding his own notes and suggestions. They worked together seamlessly now, each understanding the other's strengths. each supporting the other's vision. It wasn't just a business partnership anymore. It was a true collaboration in work and in life. Opening night at Sarah's kitchen arrived with the kind of perfect Texas sunset that painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Sarah stood in her gleaming kitchen, surveying her team as they prepared for service. Every surface sparkled, every station was meticulously organized, and the herb garden visible through the window was already providing fresh aromatics for the evening's dishes. 5 minutes to doors, Jackson called from the dining room, where the staff was completing final preparations. Sarah touched her mother's recipe book, now proudly displayed in a custom case near her station. Next to it sat the evening's menu, a imperfect blend of both mothers' recipes, enhanced by Sarah's own innovations. "Ready, chef?" her sous chef asked, a young woman she'd hired specifically because she reminded Sarah of herself 10 years ago. Talented but uncertain, needing only a chance to prove herself. "Ready," Sarah confirmed, adjusting her crisp chef's coat. "Let's show Cedar Grove what real cooking tastes like." The first guests began arriving, and Sarah could hear the buzz of excitement from the dining room. Through the massive windows that connected kitchen to dining room, she saw Martha Wilson's group being seated at a prime table, their usual superiority somewhat tempered by obvious curiosity. The Texas Monthly critic was seated discreetly in a corner, though Sarah had spotted him immediately. But it was Miss Rose who was given the true place of honor, a special table directly facing the kitchen, where she could watch her beloved Sarah shine. "First tickets coming in," called the expeditor, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of energy that came with service beginning. But this time was different. This was her kitchen, her menu, her dream coming to life. The first dishes began leaving. The kitchen, her mother's biscuits, made with Jackson's mother's technique and Sarah's own additions, served with 3 house-made compound butters. She watched through the window as Martha Wilson took her first bite, saw the moment of surprise and pleasure cross her face. "Martha Wilson just ordered a second basket of biscuits," Jackson murmured, passing by the kitchen. "Said they're better than her grandmother's." More orders flowed in. Sarah's innovative chicken fried steak with rosemary black pepper gravy, her special mac and cheese with 5 local Texas cheeses, the peach cobbler that had first caught Jackson's attention but now elevated with lavender and honey. The kitchen moved like a well-oiled machine, each cook executing their role with precision. Sarah expedited, tasted, adjusted, leading her team with the confidence she'd always had, but finally felt free to show. "Table 12 says the chicken fried steak is the best they've ever had," reported a server. "Table 7 wants to know if they can pre-order pies for Christmas," called another. Through it all, Sarah maintained her calm command, though her heart swelled with each positive response. She caught glimpses of Jackson moving through the dining room, graciously accepting compliments, but always redirecting praise to her and the kitchen team. The critic was on his 3rd course when Caroline Wilson walked in with Bradley Morrison. Sarah noticed they were seated at a less premium table, Eleanor's subtle influence at work in the reservation system, no doubt. But even they couldn't maintain their usual disdain as the food arrived. "Chef," one of the servers called out urgently, "Table 5 is asking about allergens in the special." Sarah moved smoothly to handle it personally, the way she always had at the diner. Through the window, she saw the grateful look on the mother's face as she explained exactly how they could modify the dish for her child's allergies. "That's why we hired you," she overheard one diner say to their server. "You worked with her at Pete's, didn't you?" Said she always remembered everyone's preferences. As the evening progressed, Sarah felt the atmosphere in the dining room shift. This wasn't just about good food. It was about connection, about care, about making everyone feel special, regardless of who they were. Near closing time, Miss Rose beckoned Sarah out to her table. Her eyes were shining with tears. "Your mama would be so proud," she said, squeezing Sarah's hand, "not just of the food, but of you, of who you've become." Sarah glanced at her reflection in the window, her confident posture in her chef's coat, her face flushed with success, her eyes bright with achievement. She barely recognized the woman who used to hide in Pete's kitchen. Jackson appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. The critic left, said he's never changing a word of the review he wrote after our tasting. Said the real thing was even better. "We did it," Sarah whispered. "No," Jackson corrected gently. "You did it. I just helped clear the path." As the last guests departed, full of food and praise, Sarah stood in her kitchen, and felt the rightness of everything. The way her mother's recipes had found their perfect home, the way her own innovations had elevated them into something new, the way love, both for food and for Jackson, had transformed her world. Miss Rose was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "Now that," she said with satisfaction, "is what happens when you stop letting fear write your story." 1 year later, the wedding invitation sat framed in Sarah's office at the restaurant, its elegant script announcing what everyone in Cedar Grove now saw as inevitable. "Sarah Anderson and Jackson Cole request the pleasure of your company." Next to it hung the Texas Monthly Review that had earned them a spot among Texas's top 10 restaurants, and a photo of their team accepting the regional James Beard nomination. But it was the newest addition that made Sarah smile most, a picture of a young girl in a chef's coat, beaming as she held up her cooking class completion certificate. Sarah's junior chef program, teaching kids of all sizes and backgrounds that they could pursue their culinary dreams, had become as popular as the restaurant itself. "Chef," her sous-chef appeared in the doorway. "The bride's family is here for the tasting." Sarah smiled, remembering her own upcoming wedding menu tasting, scheduled for later that week. "On my way." In the private dining room, she found Caroline Wilson and her mother, Martha, waiting with a nervous-looking bride-to-be. Sarah remembered when such a meeting would have intimidated her. Now she moved with easy confidence, setting out her carefully prepared tasting dishes. "Sarah, dear," Martha said warmly, and the warmth was genuine now, earned over months of perfectly executed garden club luncheons and holiday celebrations. "We've been telling Amanda that she simply must try your new spring menu for the reception. I heard you won some kind of award for it," Amanda added shyly. "The menu's inspired by Texas wildflowers," Sarah explained, unveiling the first course. "Each dish captures the essence of a different bloom." As they tasted their way through the courses, Sarah watched Amanda's face light up with the same joy she'd seen in so many guests over the past year. The flavors told stories of tradition and innovation, of love and celebration, of a chef who had found her voice. "It's perfect," Amanda declared, "though," she hesitated, "I know it's not on the menu, but I grew up eating at Pete's Diner. Your chicken fried steak." "Say no more," Sarah smiled. "We'll make it happen." After they left, Sarah found Jackson in their shared office, reviewing expansion plans. The success of Sarah's kitchen had led to opportunities neither had expected. Requests to open locations in Houston and Dallas, offers to develop a cookbook, even a potential TV appearance. "Good tasting?" he asked, pulling her into his lap. "Amanda Wilson wants chicken fried steak at her society wedding." Sarah laughed. "Can you imagine Martha's face a year ago if someone had suggested that? A lot can change in a year." Jackson kissed her softly. "Speaking of change," he handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed to Pete's Diner. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "Pete sold it to that restaurant group?" "Which is owned by Cole Restaurant Group," Jackson finished. "Has been from the start. I thought you might want to do something special with it." Sarah stared at him, understanding dawning. "The cooking school," she whispered, "for kids who can't afford culinary training. Seems like the perfect place to help other dreams come true." Before she could respond, Eleanor burst in, waving a newspaper. "Have you seen this? The Houston Chronicle is calling you the new face of Texas cuisine." "They're calling her a lot more than that," Lisa added, following with a stack of magazines. "Rising star, culinary innovator, champion of authentic cooking." Sarah looked at the articles, remembering the days when she'd hidden her mother's recipe book beneath the diner's counter. Now those recipes, along with her own creations, were being celebrated across the state. "Oh, and Miss Rose called," Eleanor continued. "Says she's got another set of your mother's old photos for the cookbook." The cookbook had been Miss Rose's idea. Not just recipes, but the stories behind them, showing how food could transform lives and bring people together, just like it had transformed Cedar Grove. A commotion from the kitchen drew their attention. Sarah's junior chefs were arriving for their afternoon class, filling the restaurant with excited chatter. Through the window, she could see Martha Wilson's granddaughter proudly wearing her junior chef coat, helping a newer student with their apron. "Go on," Jackson urged. "They're waiting for their teacher." Sarah touched her mother's recipe book, then the wedding invitation, then finally the deed to Pete's Diner. Sometimes life gave you second chances. Sometimes it gave you more than you'd ever dreamed possible. "You know," she said to Jackson, "I never thanked you properly for coming to Cedar Grove that day." "Yes, you did," he smiled. "Every time you step into that kitchen, every time you help someone else believe in their dreams, every time you show that love for food, for people, for life is worth taking chances on." Sarah kissed him, then headed for her kitchen, where a new generation of dreamers waited to learn that with the right ingredients, courage, determination, and love, any recipe for happiness was possible. As she began the class, Miss Rose watched, from her usual spot, smiling contentedly. The woman teaching with such confidence bore little resemblance to the girl who'd once hidden her light under an ill-fitting apron. But then, that was what love did, the right kind of love, the kind that saw your true worth and helped you believe in it too. It transformed you, like butter and flour becoming pastry, like dreams becoming reality, like two different lives blending into something even more delicious than either could have imagined alone.